Welcome to On the Go with the American Association of University Women. I'm Kathleen Myers, your host. Thanks for joining us. And are you an avid reader? Do you enjoy books? We're going on a literary journey with a celebrated author and poet, Cynthia Hearn Darling. Welcome to the show, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathleen.
Well, it's our pleasure. Now, you have written a poetry book called 49 Poems.
Yes.
And why 49? Why not 50?
You're the first person to ask that question. The truth is there are 49 poems in that book. The other thing is that I didn't want a very clever or cute sort of title, so I decided to just tell it the way it was and put 49. And the more I've been around that book, the more I really think that 49 is not a bad number. It's not quite as dull as 50 or 100 or a dozen, but you know, there are possibilities for that 49, and I'm not quite sure what they are yet.
Okay, well that sounds very expressive. Where do you get your ideas for your poems?
Well, that's a really long story, but I remember that when I was 6 years old, I got a little scrap of paper and I sat down and I wrote, and I still have the poem. I wrote something like, I want to see all the things, do all the things up in the blue, blue sky. That was my poem. And I still do want to do that, and I still do want to write. So I began, it must have been just something I had to do or wanted to do.
That's just great. Would you like to read one of your poems for our viewers?
I'd love to. May I do that now?
Please.
The title of this poem is I'm Cold. Slow, palmetto meadows come to me in drear January days. I want islands where mongooses have killed all the snakes, where the sugar cane stands, disappointing the northerner stranger's taste. A place with spaces of time, uncorralled in boxes, where sun and moon are the only determinants. I need some roaming room right now, opening the crevices of my mind with no cold air blasts to rattle my little sinus cavity caves, encircling my crunched up cerebrum brain. What a way, what a day I could have, close to land yet close to stars, watching tropic ants militarily assault and eat tropical dead, faster than the Israelites ate their manna. But it's January. Let me go away.
That's wonderful. The imagery there is terrific.
Like the military ants?
Yes, like military ants. That's wonderful, like army ants. That's great.
I could also mention at the moment I have in front of me a little yellow piece of paper that I got out of the Parade magazine a few years ago, and it had to do with poetry. And it really sort of humbled me. But a writer wrote in and she said, why are my tax dollars going to pay a poet laureate when nobody reads poetry today? So it just sort of humbled me. And the answer really wasn't much better. The person answering said, well, you might like it if you tried it. And she said, by the way, you don't really need to worry about the money coming out of your tax money. $35,000 is given by a private endowment. So it was a very humbling process for me to think that, well, that's what my fellow citizens may be thinking.
Oh. But they do pay good money for your poetry book, so.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
They do. Now, you write novels and poetry.
Yes.
Do you have a preference?
I do have a preference, which is poetry. And I have a preference because there's so many people throughout generations, the ancient Greeks, everyone admired poetry as an art. Because it's a thing not only of beauty, it's a thing that sort of gives you a creativity and a freedom that I don't think you really can find in anything else that I know of. So that I guess I really do have to put poetry a little bit above novels, which are a fairly recent invention in the last few hundred years. So I got to admit that.
All right, well, so admitted then. That's great. I want to talk about your novels as well. And one of your novels is called Shunned, Outcast in the Land. And can you give us just a little synopsis of what Shunned is about?
Well, it began one day when I was thinking to myself, I think I must have been in a down moment, but thinking, you know, there's nothing left in this country that you'd get shunned for, is there? You know, there used to be things that people would make you feel ashamed to do, but I couldn't think of very many. And at that very same time, on TV, I saw this Baptist minister in the South, and the newsman said that he had been shunned by his community and by the church in which he was preaching. He was shunned because he was preaching hellfire and damnation. So I said, oh, there are. I'm going to write something on this. So I used the character named Amos as a Baptist minister who becomes really an outcast in the little town that he lives in. And parallel to that, his wife is also going through really difficult times because their son had been killed by overdose of drugs in a university setting by a counselor. So she, the wife, is so distraught that she pours paint on the sign of the pharmaceutical company in the neighborhood where they live. So she's now being shunned. And both of these stories began to kind of come together. Poor Amos is suffering terribly by people right and left confronting him about his beliefs. And at the same time, Carrie, his wife, is really suffering tragically by the death of her son, and also trying her very best to figure out why is it that there are so many drugs, and what can she do about it. So in a sense, I have one side of the book based on, you'd say, Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter with the shunning, and then the other side, which is really a kind of a muckraking part of it, like Upton Sinclair did with the meatpacking industry in the book The Jungle. So I've got those two parallel stories going, and just because there wasn't enough happening, I also threw in a murder.
Oh.
So that's sort of how it all came about.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Cynthia. Now, I do have a book review that I would like to read about Shunned. And this reviewer said, a terrific read, highly recommended. Miss Darling combines mystery, suspense, realism, and a profound understanding of the spiritual aspects of life in a compact, beautifully written story. Whether you read the book for excitement, to guess what might happen next, or to consider questions of heaven and hell, good and evil, or right and wrong, you will be rewarded.
Well, thank you for reading that one. I really appreciate it. But there are certain elements of that in there. You know, this is Amos. This is a good man, and he's preaching something he really believes. So it makes the reader, in a sense, think, is this something I want to look at? I would say there really is a spiritual element in a lot of my books. But a lot of it also has to do with decisions that people make. Because, you know, you can make one decision and then you can sort of head in a direction that maybe you hadn't really wanted to. And so those are things that really have interested me.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think we're all maybe one bad decision away from some calamity, correct?
Yes.
Now, we were showing our viewers the cover art of Shunned, which is very striking. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's a painting that I now own, but I'm forever grateful to a dear friend of mine named Ann Landry, who is in the retirement home Goodwin House. And she does sort of primitive arts and Christian themes, and I'm just grateful that I have that play, whatever it's called.
Piece of art.
Piece of art.
Well, that's a great story. Now, one of the other books you've written is Georgetown Journeys, The Path Made Straight. And can you just give us a little idea of the storyline of Georgetown Journeys?
Okay. Well, again, I never thought of it, but they're two parallel characters who come into Georgetown in the 1960s, which is also a place that I came into. And she, the first character, wants to escape her hometown, a little town in Tennessee, and she's come up the really hard way. She arrives on the bus. She sees that Jack Kennedy and Jackie are just the most wonderful things that she's ever experienced. So she ends up in Georgetown, has a hard life. Parallel to that, there's a young man who just graduated in the 60s from Virginia Seminary, which is right across the river. And he is lucky to get a job as an assistant in an Episcopal church. So his life and Jackie's run in the same time period together, but they're never really quite meeting. And he does things in his life, she does things in her life. And at the end of the book, there's some reconciliation. But it just fascinated me that they went through a period of 50 years and doing the best they could in some ways, and yet both of them searching for maybe the same things.
And does anyone get murdered in this one?
Maybe they should have. There's a little bit of violence in there, but I won't say murder.
Okay, and we don't want a spoiler alert, anyway. So I would like to read a book review on Georgetown Journeys as well. This is a book that you hate to put down, even when you know you should stop to do something necessary. The characters were well drawn with development that was engaging, hoping for more from the author.
Oh, good. Well, I'm hoping for more from the author, too. I have on the cover of it a trolley, a Washington, D.C. trolley. And for me, that sort of exemplifies what the book is all about. It's the journey that we're all on. And it's how we arrive at that journey in the long run. And I really, really appreciate these reviews because they mean a lot to me and make it all worthwhile when I can wake up in the morning and say, well, somebody liked it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, they did. Yeah, these books are available on Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have other outlets?
CreateSpace, which is another similar sort of a self-publishing company, it is another one it's on. And I have done many, many promotional activities. I have a good friend who has been a help to me, and Georgetown Journeys is, I think, in the library in Georgetown. The other ones are some in Fairfax County in the libraries. There are bookstores, there are some, depending on the individual store, there's some gift shops, but primarily the main place where it is in Amazon.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they're readily available.
Yeah, it's easy. It's
Amazon.
Easy to buy, as we all know, in Amazon.
One click.
Yes.
One
right.
click and you've got it.
Yeah.
Great. And let's talk about your creative process. Outside of the poetry, which is very expressive, but the novels themselves. Once you get an idea, how do you go about writing it all down?
Well, I find, and I didn't do this on purpose, but I had stories in me. And I started by writing short stories about something that just stood out in my mind that had happened to me over the years or happened to someone. And so I ended up with 6 or 7 of these short stories, about 20 pages long. And then the natural next step is, well, maybe this could be a little longer. And I began to sit down in my bedroom and I began to close the door and try to stay in there if I could and lengthen these stories and make these stories into something. And then I'd go back and say, wait a minute, no one could ever understand that. I haven't put enough in it. And so that's been the process for me, is fortunately to have that sort of core with me all the time. That short story has really helped a lot.
So the short story is just sort of the seed,
Yeah.
and then it starts growing.
Yeah. I actually took a class at Christ Church in Alexandria, and it was on writing in the style of Flannery O'Connor, which is not exactly an easy assignment. And from that, I realized I can do this. I can do this short story, and then I just, from there on, it just sort of kept going and going, until it became a really well-ingrained habit that probably my family would like to see me loosen up from a little bit. But that's how I began.
Well, that's a good point then. How long does it take you to write a novel?
Well, I just finished the third, which is not in here today, not one we're talking about. But of all of them, I think I could not do much in December. There was too much happening. I generally would start in January and usually end up around October or November trying to write every day. And I would say 10 or 11 months just to do that. But that certainly didn't include the publishing of it on Amazon or the looking for literary agents or all the other things you have to do.
Well, Cynthia, can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, it can be very painful. I mean, in the sense that you have to be prepared. I had no idea. I thought people sat down and they wrote, and then when it was finished, they somehow magically found an agent, a publisher. Well, it just didn't work that way. And then fortunately, my son is really a great help to me technically to do all the things that are necessary. When you want to put a book on Amazon, you have to go through many steps. And every time you finish the first step, they'll give you a little check mark. And every time you finish the second. And when you get the cover done, and so on and on and on. And I don't think if I had known in the beginning all of the work involved that I would have thought twice, probably.
Oh, it's that daunting?
I think you have to be, if you're going to read, if you're going to write, you really have to be aware of the fact that whether you have a publisher or whether you have an agent or whether you go on Amazon, there's work. And today, you have no one to do it for you, unlike years past. You have no one to do your promotion. You have no one to do any of those things. So you just have to say, I'm taking it on myself.
Oh, so it's not as glamorous as
No.
it sounds. You're fulfilling a lot of roles.
Yeah.
You're doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Do you have an editor, or do you?
I have many editors with the small e for editor. I have a stepdaughter, actually, who has been very kind to me, and she reads all my manuscripts, and not so much in terms of the grammar or all of those things, but to say to me, well, this could have been put somewhere else, or why did you do this? And so in that pattern, she has made me think about it. I've got relatives and cousins all over the place that are helping me. I have a nephew in Charlottesville who's very, very good at picking out the little things. Mm-hmm. My poor husband, he's been doing that for me. Mm-hmm. I'd say a half dozen people have helped me, including a friend of mine, Richard Jones, who in the book Georgetown really helped me because apparently I didn't have a clue about what an Episcopal priest wears and what they're called. So he helped me a great deal about getting the names right in that.
Good. Yeah, I imagine you have to do a fair amount of research. So you have to do that on your own or with the help of friends like Richard Jones?
Well, I think it depends on what you're writing, but I may have mentioned that for each one of these books, I had some classics in front of me that I really believed were important tales that had to be told again. And I did a lot of research on looking at the books of Hawthorne, looking at Upton Sinclair, looking at 1984, which is a sort of a we're all on pills given to us by the government kind of book. And I looked at those. With the book Georgetown, I was told later that it was a lot like a book called The Idiot by Dostoevsky. I had no idea. I had not read that book, but I had to go back and research it and see what was there. I also, in my last book, I had to do a lot about Apaches, which I'll talk to you about later.
Sure. So, but there are elements you're saying from other authors, but you're doing this as an homage to their work.
Excellent word. Excellent word.
Yes, we can see that in your writing. Well, let's take a few minutes to talk about your most recent project then, about the Apaches.
All right. Well, I did at one time work on an Apache reservation. I worked there as a social worker in an Indian health hospital in Fort Apache, Arizona. And I have a lot of stories from there, the things that really happened. But this particular story, I have written it about a young man, and my model again for that, my classic, is the Red Badge of Courage. And here's a young man working in Washington, working with wounded warriors, and he's really immature, and he just can't cope with what he sees. So he, just on the spur of the moment, he goes out and he works out in Arizona on the reservation. So I've just taken that story and combined it with witchcraft and with no murder in this one.
No murder.
But witchcraft comes pretty close.
Yes.
And again, in this one, the first one had to do with a Baptist minister, the second an Episcopal minister, and the third turns out to be a Lutheran.
A Lutheran, okay.
So I've got my bases pretty well covered.
Yeah, you've covered it all. That's terrific. So when you were a child, did you do a lot of reading?
I was very nearsighted, and it came very easily to me to pick that book up close to me and to read. Mm-hmm. Also, I think those people who have a talkative mother understand that there are times when you really need to get away from that. Mm-hmm. And so I developed a lot of ways to do that, which is to put the book on my lap when she was talking. And so I developed a lot of good reading skills from that.
Great.
And I still like to read, but I have not been able to in the way that I did before.
Mm-hmm. Well, reading provides a great escape for a lot of things.
Great.
Really super in between those, living in between those.
Unfortunately,
covers.
It's taken up my time doing the promotions and the writing, so that I haven't had time to do the kinds of things that I really love in terms of reading.
Well, did you have a favorite author?
I won't say I have a favorite author. I think if you ask 90% of the women who read in this country, you know they're going to tell you Jane Austen. That just goes without saying. And I understand that, because Jane Austen tells you what every woman wants to hear from a man. It's just marvelous that you could find that kind of love. But I don't know that she's my favorite. I know there are lots of them. A person that I have a little more problem with, and he's popular right now, is J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. I can understand the feeling that the boy had being apart from the community, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean as much to me. So I've got, in my background, I think that has a lot to do with, what you read has a lot to do with who you are. And the Irish and the English writers are just amazing, as well as that good old Delta land in the South. It just produces writers left and right.
F. Scott Fitzgerald,
all of
Faulkner.
them. Faulkner, Eudora Welty, just so many that come right out of there. And I think you have to really, you know, I've just mentioned before, but I feel you have to write about what you have been through and what you know.
Well, I think that's the advice they always give you. Write what you know. Don't try to make something up that's just completely foreign to yourself.
You can't see Mark Twain writing about New York City, can you?
I sure can't.
Doesn't work that way.
I sure can't. Do you feel are the traits of a good author? Do you need to be an observer, a listener? Just do you take in life a little bit differently than the rest of us?
No, probably not. But the more mature I get, the more I realize that I have got things that have happened to me over the years, and for some reason or other, they've been in sort of a file cabinet in my brain. I can almost see it. That I have these things that have happened and happened to others that are there, and they're just sort of sitting there. And when I realized, well, wait a minute, I need to get these out, because when I'm gone, nobody's going to know this. And so that's really the observing part of it was, yes, I did see them. They must have meant something to me, or I would not have kept them in my memory.
So things have definitely made an impression on you, and you draw from that to use in your writing.
Yeah, I think my husband thinks that someday I might get sued if I keep up doing this, but I'm not planning on it.
Well, don't you put a disclaimer that any...
I'll have to.
No resemblance to any person living or dead, or what is that little caveat that people put on there?
I think so.
So you don't want to draw too much from real life.
It's a fine line there.
Yeah, there is a fine line. And do you have any particular advice, briefly, for the viewers?
Well, I think it's sort of almost immodest of me to give anybody advice, but the only thing I can say is that in today's world of the self-publishing and all of the difficulties that go along with what's happening in the publishing world, you just have to be warned that this has got to be something you have to take seriously, and there's a serious amount of hard work involved in it. And there are people I know who publish memoirs, which is a wonderful thing, but they generally do it for the benefit of their own families and for that limited audience. But if you plan on doing it and trying to reach a larger group of people, I wish you a lot of luck and a lot of hard work.
Well, I've got some advice for our viewers. I want you all to run right out and pick up these books. The 49 Poems, The Shunned, Outcast in the Land, The Georgetown Journeys, all by Cynthia Hearn Darling, who has been gracious enough to be our guest. And we hope that you've enjoyed it, this literary journey that we've been on. And of course, we want you to join us next time with On the Go with the American Association of University Women. We are always on the go. We're always looking for interesting topics to bring to our viewers, and I think we've certainly hit the mark with these books.